Okay, and so over to you, Brock. I mean, the thing which I think is fascinating about the way that Overlap Associates and Brock's work is described is that they really focus on asking the question why at the beginning of their work. And I don't really want to make any assumptions about all the things you're going to share with us. I'm going to let you introduce yourself rather than go through a detailed bio presentation. But Overlap Associates actually won a Canadian Business Award, which was announced in October, wasn't it? Yep. Yeah. Can you just tell people a little bit about what the award was about? I thought that was a really great testament to some of the growth and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's the Canadian Business Excellence Awards was 22 companies across Canada in private business. And specifically, they look at employee engagement, innovation, and how you treat your customers. And so we were in the top 3, and we just won that, and it was really nice. So thank you. So good.
So I think that we're going to be really interested and engaged. Brock is a trusted advisor to many organizations and leaders across many sectors who are ready to radically change and achieve true transformation. And you'll notice that's a direct connection to what we've been talking about yesterday and what we want to talk about today. So thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you. Just really quickly, so the very first time I saw this kind of mic, what's this called? It has a name. Anyway, it has some name. It doesn't matter. The very first time I saw it was 2 years ago at an innovation summit that UNICEF was putting on in Finland. And they had 600 people at this thing, and no one had seen one of these before. And so you can imagine a room much bigger than this, and they were sitting in a bit of a semicircle. And so people would throw this mic, and people were so unused to this, they weren't looking for the mic. And so this mic was constantly slamming into people's heads, and it was fantastic anyway. So that's my favorite story about that mic. Hi. The very first thing we're going to do is, and you've already talked to your partner, so that's exciting, so this shouldn't feel as scary. We're going to all stand up. If we're comfortable, we're going to hold hands with our partner. I always like a 2-hand hold. Hands out. Only if you're comfortable. This is great. I love it. You don't have to hold hands. So what I want you to do with your partner, I love all this group hand-holding. It's fantastic. What I want you to do with your partner, I want you to look into their eyes, and I want you to tell them a love story. It could be your love story, someone else's love story. You have 1 minute to do it. Dive in. All right, that's about a minute. So wrap up your story. No, don't sit down. Guys, we got to do it in reverse. We're not telling a love story, though, this time. So now your partner who just heard the love story, that's cool. The story I want the other person to tell back to their partner is like an adventure story from your life. Okay, 1 minute adventure story. Dive in. Oh, this is such a funny exercise. This isn't my exercise. This is a dear friend of mine who does this with groups, and I just really like it because I think this is what actual human-centered design work feels like in many instances. So who really enjoyed that? Nice, that's nice. Who was deeply uncomfortable? A couple of us, a few at the back. Did everyone maintain contact with each other if you started that way? Nope, some groups sat down. Jake back there was very awkward with his hands on his waist. I don't know if I want to hold hands with someone. It's so good. So, and then I asked you to tell a story. I asked you to tell a love story and look into that person's eyes, and it was only a minute. And this is, in some ways, I think what this work feels like when we do this really well. I think it requires vulnerability. I think it requires us to be a little uncomfortable. And in a room of people who are our intellectual peers and peers in many ways, we all have good jobs, so on and so forth, it's a lot easier to be vulnerable in these kinds of situations. But if you are working with vulnerable populations, as we do in much of our work, the vulnerability that's required to meaningfully work with those people is a whole different level, because you're trying to co-create with people that don't have the same education as you and don't use the same language as you. And it's really hard to do that. But if you can, you get much better results in the work. Design thinking is a process for solving complex problems and specifying the actions required to reach a desirable future. So there's a definition, but I think this work has much more to do with the way we think, the way that we feel when we're doing this work. I think design thinking, when we're practicing it in a meaningful way, changes our heart. And it was nice to hear that you guys were talking about coming to work as a whole person yesterday, because I think that's what's really required to do this work well, to see the humanity in others and respect them for who they are and their experience and find ways to create with them. So how many people have heard of design thinking, human-centered design? I would assume, yeah, a lot of folks. So often it's set up as it's a process and there's a set of steps, and that's all true. But I think when this really takes hold and when the design bug bites you, you begin asking different questions. You think about things in a different way. And it's not about the 5 steps or the 7 steps, whatever the framework is. It's about fundamentally changing the way you think about problems, and it changes everything about the way you do your work. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we got into this work and then leave some ways to take design early action. This is Damien Newman, and this is an illustration that's meant to communicate how design feels. So it's messy, and it's ambiguous at times, and it's deeply uncomfortable if you're doing it right. So we start these processes, and we're often working in complex problems. Complexity, I heard Frances Wetsey describe this. Allison, was it Frances who came up with this definition of complexity? Anyway, I can't remember. She can tell me later. So the difference between simple, complicated, and complex. Simple problems are things like baking a cake, which I'm going to do for my 3-year-old on the weekend because she turned 3 today. I know. I was going to make you all sing happy birthday to her and FaceTime her in, but anyway, we're not doing it. I thought she'd like that, though. So following a recipe is a simple problem. I don't know how to make a cake right off the top of my head, but if I can follow a recipe, there's steps, away we go. A complicated problem is getting to space. We know how to do it, but we need a lot of people. They need a lot of education. We got to follow everything really rigidly. And most of the time, we're pretty successful at getting to space, but that's really complicated. Complexity is raising kids. So I have 2 daughters. They are radically different from each other. One thing that works with one does not immediately work with the other. And it's those kinds of problems that exist in many of the really, again, complex spaces that defy being solved. And design gives you a way to work on them, but they're not, right? They're messes. And so you get into these problems and you feel really good. We're going to do a design process. And then you slam into the complexity and realize, oh my God, this was supposed to be a set of 5 steps and we were going to work through it and it was going to work. And it does, but it just isn't linear. So you have to follow the line where it goes. I often think about my 3-year-old's hair. She sucks her thumb and twirls her hair at the same time, which is a real hard habit to break. And in its extreme, she'll get her hand caught in her hair, which is adorable, sad for her because she's real upset about it. But unpicking that knot takes time and patience, and you can't just look at the knot and know exactly how to get it undone. And that's kind of, again, how this feels. In the middle of this drawing, there's, we get out of the first knot, and we feel really excited about that because we've made progress, and then you slam into another one because, again, the complex problems surface more questions and surface more knots, and you're continuing to work through those. So this is sort of how this work feels. And so if you're doing a design process, you should know that going in. It won't feel comfortable, but then that's good. You're doing it right. So I got my start in traditional advertising. I'm trained as a designer. I worked in advertising on the writing and visual side, and I used to sell turkey sperm was one of our clients. Quick fact, all turkey DNA is owned by one of 2 companies. So if you buy a turkey or organic turkey, it doesn't matter. Any turkey is all owned by one of 2 companies. We worked for one of them. It's just surprising. These are these things we learn. This has nothing to do with design. I just like to tell people because I think it's shocking. I was really good at selling turkey sperm. We made great ads that really connected with farmers. We got great results for those ads. And I was really good at that work. And I was good at that work because we would go and sit down with farmers, which I didn't think was a weird thing. But so much of our work is about you have to have the idea. Your worth is how good you are at coming up with ideas. But your ideas probably aren't great. Ideas are pretty cheap and easy to come up with. So the reason why I was really good in advertising was because we would go and sit down with the people that we were advertising to and talk to them, which was a really weird thing in that space at the time. It was coming in a little bit. They were doing that more in the UK. But there was so much pressure on the creatives to come up with award-winning ideas and ideas that got results. And I had grown up on a farm, and so in some of my very first advertising work, where we were doing this work for this turkey company selling sperm to farmers, we just couldn't break into the Hutterite market. And the Hutterites are big turkey farmers in Canada. And I said, we keep making assumptions about what these folks are wanting. But I grew up on a farm, and I think we just have to go and sit down at their table and have breakfast and break bread and actually talk to them about what it's like to be a Hutterite farmer and farm turkey, and the relationship with this company, which is so obvious, but is not something we do because we're trying to get to ideas quickly, we're trying to solve problems quickly, but we won awards for our work all of the time because we just went and talked with the people that we were advertising to. And then you make better ads, you make better work. So that's how I got my start in this. But then, selling turkey sperm, suits, the things that we were doing just didn't really fill my heart. And so my co-founder and I of Overlap worked at this firm where we did all of this work. They've been around for 30 years, and we did high-end print work. And I was the creative director of this print team. And I was lucky enough to be there when the financial crash happened. And so everyone stopped spending money on print work. And we didn't spend $250,000 on annual reports anymore, and everyone wanted to go digital. But that wasn't the team we had. We had a team of print graphic designers. And so we pivoted that business, and we started working with the companies that we had these long relationships with on complex problems that they were now facing, because everyone was freaking out and no one knew what to do. And so we started working with their teams in different ways and teaching them to work like designers. And we just kept doing the same thing that we'd been doing. Just go and talk to people, understand what's going on for them. And 20 minutes remaining, I got it. And then start working on problems in different ways. And we tried to buy that firm. We didn't get a deal. And so we started Overlap. And because we had all these non-competes and all of these things, we started doing work in the social profit space or not-for-profit space, because we wanted to work on problems that mattered. Working on complex problems in a business situation was really cool and opened us up to this space, but then we wanted to do this and fill our hearts a little bit more. So we started doing work with UNICEF and hospitals. And this was an example from one of the hospitals that we worked with in the early days. In talking to patients about their experience, this was a statement that surfaced. And what that turned into in that hospital was a no one dies alone policy, where anyone from administration to cleaners were empowered to sit with someone and hold their hand, be with them if you realize they were in their final moments. And the whole system has been created around this, so they monitor people in different ways. Volunteers at the hospital are able to go and just be with someone as they die. And that's massive. That's huge for a culture at an organization. We do lots of patient satisfaction surveys in hospitals, and we ask you if the food is good. Was the room clean? Did you feel included in your care? We don't ask people if they were scared, because I don't think we want to know, right? So design work surfaces different kinds of insights that allow you to take different kinds of action, that allow you to think differently about these things. We kind of just take for granted that, well, people die, but can we make dying better? So that's what we do in some of our best work. Our healthcare work led us into doing more and more work with mental health and addictions patients. And again, I think something that we notice in so many sectors is that we get really focused on a particular sector. So I'll go and speak to a group that is they're all in the healthcare space, and they'll be like, this is so good, this gathering. We are so diverse today. We have nurses, and we have pediatricians, and we have people from, I don't know, this area of medicine, and this area of medicine, and this area of medicine. And they're so excited because all of these different people are from all of these different fields within medicine, except they're all from medicine. So that's not really diversity, right? That's not really diverse views. We're all still talking the same language. We're all still talking about the same things, and we all have these different slivers on it. So again, in human-centered design work, we say put that person in the middle of the thing, and then where does that lead you? So in our mental health and addictions work, it started by working with 70 organizations across this particular geography that all served the same population. And the conclusion they came to was, we touch these people for 5% of their lives. And if we actually want to change outcomes for them, we have to look at other places that are not traditional places, because so many of these things are organized around who funds me. So if I'm funded by the Ministry of Health, I'm going to sit down with other people who are all funded by the same funder, and we're not going to get the library. We're not going to bring in the municipality. We're not going to bring in these other groups, because often these tables are convened based on the funding, which is just, again, super weird. So in this work, working with patients, this was one of the principles that emerged as we co-created a service standard that allowed them to evaluate, think about how to design services called dignity by default. Dignity was the main thing that patients and their families wanted in service. The reason they would bail on service was because they felt stigma, because they didn't actually feel like their healthcare provider wanted them there. And many of them who recognize that they have behaviors that are uncomfortable will say, I get that I'm annoying. I don't like it, but I don't want to go to my appointment today because I just don't want to deal with that. So one of the principles for this service standard said, I need a service that you'd recommend to a family member. Design a service and ask yourself, is this a service that you would send your mother to, or your sister, or your brother, et cetera? And that, again, was transformative for people within this system to take a hard look at the services they're offering and change the way that they're designing them, make them better, basically. This healthcare work then led to libraries, because again, for this population, libraries are often on the front line. We do lots of work with libraries. We love libraries. They're super adorable. Oh, God, libraries. They're so nice. They're so good. And they're painfully introverted often, the librarians. I love the librarians. And they're all grappling with how do we redesign the social contract with our communities? Because we're more than books. They know they're more than books. They do a whole lot of stuff. And one of the things that they do is work on the front line for this population of people who have mental health and addiction issues, who are often street involved, because libraries are great. There's something to do. They're warm. Many of them are beautiful. And no one wants to be bored. So if I don't have anything else to do, I can go to the library. I can see other people and have some interaction. It gives me a sense of belonging. And so librarians didn't know what to do with this population because they're not equipped to interact with them if there's an issue. And so what we're seeing, many of the libraries we're working with, and in this community in particular, they just hired a social worker on their staff so that they have a better way to interact with this population, because we're trying to make the lives of these individuals better and increase health outcomes for them. So we're now seeing libraries begin to hire social workers because, again, there's a high centrality for these organizations with this population. That then led to working with the police. So the police in this community, of course, is another group that interacts with this population all of the time. And it's a particularly innovative police chief who is he describes the police force as social workers with different tools, and he means that in the best way. And he said, if we're going to change the way our folks interact with this population, we have to change their training. And so we're now designing or redesigning some of their training to give them better soft skills, because that's 95% of what policing is. And so we're changing the police force so that that group of folks that interact with this population gets a better experience, and they don't just immediately get taken to the emergency room. We are helping libraries who interact with this population equip themselves in a different way to give this population a different experience, catch them early, so on and so forth. And then we're changing the way the services themselves are being designed and thought about in a co-creation way by having teams of these individuals participate with us and providers in creating and evaluating new services. None of these people tend to sit down together. The police do, but it's more from a justice lens than a social outcome lens. And it wouldn't happen if we didn't put that person in the middle. If we had started with health services, which is what we often do, we do a whole bunch of stuff in that space, and we miss a whole bunch of people's lives. And so I think that when we're looking for ways to invest differently, ways to actually tackle problems, we have to recognize that sometimes when we pick a focus, we care a lot about mental health. We tend to then default to a particular set of sectors because we don't see libraries fitting that, except that libraries super fit that. Bus drivers super fit that if you care about mental health, because again, public transport is one way that many of these individuals get around. So using a design lens allows you to see different dimensions of the problem and think about that problem in different ways. But principally, you get these insights by talking to these individuals. So what happens in your life? What's your day look like? And when this work all got started, that's what the healthcare providers wanted to do. They said, we know we're such a small piece of this. Go talk to people and find out what's actually happening, and then let's start convening the right groups together. But it's hard to do co-creation. It's hard to bring in the people that you're designing for or with because of things like this. So we do lots of work with UNICEF. You guys were talking about the SDGs. We're doing a 15-year project with UNICEF Canada to align with the SDGs to try to get Canada's child well-being ranking up to the top 5. So really quickly, we rank 17th. Actually, I think it's 24th now, of the top 40 richest countries in the world for childhood well-being. We went across the country and talked to Canadians and asked them where they think we rank, and Canadians said, wow, top 3? Right? Like, we're the best country in the world, and we're so good at hockey. It's got to be top 3. I mean, my kids are the best, and my nephew is the best, and so I think we've got to be, that's right, that's where we are. And when you explain the data and the index and where we actually are, the response to that was, nope, I don't believe it. I don't believe your data. It's wrong. So it's a cultural issue. We have a powerful myth in Canada that we're the best country in the world. We have a terrible place to compare ourselves to directly across that lake. And you should never compare yourself to the US on social measures because they always rank really low in the top richest countries in the world. We should compare ourselves to the Nordics because the Nordics are winning on all of those indexes. So how do we be more like them instead of being smug that we're better than this giant country to the south of us? So anyway, in this work, we're doing lots of work with kids and trying to empower kids to use design tools and design processes and work on different things. And obviously, there's lots of engagement with kids. And the challenge with working with any group of people that you're designing with or for, but especially vulnerable people and especially kids say things like this. So what should the Prime Minister do to help kids in Canada? And one of our kids said, unicorns running around everywhere, which is lovely. But we don't know what to do with that, right? Because we have a 2-hour thing here, we brought all these people around, and this is costing money, and these kids are saying stuff like that. One of the kids, they're so funny. One of the things we do with kids is ask them to ask us questions, which is a really cool way. That's a very easy thing you can do When you're engaging in design work and you're not sure how to get started, go to the people that you're trying to design something for or will use the thing you're creating and just ask them to ask you questions about how the thing currently works. You get lots of really great feedback. So we do this with kids. And one of the kids, I explained the activity right off the cuff. She was like, "Do ducks sink sometimes?" Cool. Like it's beautiful. And what do we do with that? And I have lots of academics in the room when we're doing some of this work who are like, well, and that's the reason why, they don't have anything useful to contribute. We're so paternalistic that we know better than our patients. We know better than the kids we're designing for. We know better than the people who are street involved. But we don't. They have their own wisdom. They have their own experience, and they're experts in their own lives. They may not know how to get to better, but they can tell you what it looks like. So for us, statements like this are more about the nature of them than the content of them. When the very first question a kid asks me is, do ducks sink sometimes? There's beauty and joy in that question. That kid has not had any, doesn't have anything significantly negative happening in their life, and that's really lovely. Some kids, there we go, talk about this. So kids that are 6 and 7, the first thing out of their mouth is, I'm really worried about climate change. And that's literally what they say. Or, I'm really worried about Donald Trump. I can't believe the number of little kids that know who Donald Trump is. They don't know who Justin Trudeau is. But they've heard of this man, and they've been conditioned through the stories they hear that bad guys don't win, and they have this sense that he's not good, and they're confused. And we're seeing this play out in many of the sessions that we're doing, and it's interesting. So kids have wisdom, and they hear things, and they know stuff, and you have to make spaces for them to be able to contribute in meaningful ways. That's what makes it hard. So really quickly, some ideas for how to take designerly action. Co-create with the people that experience the problem. So again, we'll bring in experts. We bring in all these people who know something about the problem, but they don't experience it themselves. You're not really doing design work if you're not working with the people that actually experience the problem. You're just making assumptions. And experts are super cool. They can tell you all kinds of interesting things about that problem. But if you're not bringing the people who experience it in, you're not really doing design. You need to have more than one idea. So we get so married to the first idea, and that's the one that it's going to work, and we're going to put everything into that. Design is about multiple ideas. It's about making multiple things. If I was going to do a project to redesign the street down there, I would go and talk to 5 people. I wouldn't talk to 100. I'd talk to 5 people, and I would ask them about their experience on the street. And I would look for things that were common and things that were really different or stood out. And then I'd make stuff. I'd make 5 different things. And then I'd go and talk to 10 more people with 5 things that I made in response to the first group and say, tell me about this. What do you think about that? Make stuff. Have more than one idea, because your first ideas are all terrible. They're all awful. Every single one is terrible. So you have to iterate on those ideas. You have to involve people in feedback around those ideas so that you get to better ones. Work with people that aren't in your field. So again, we get so stuck in our spaces that we occupy, and we just bring healthcare people around, or we just bring people that work in childhood well-being around, and we don't actually get different perspectives. We don't actually embrace diversity in the way that we generate ideas. So bringing in people that aren't in your field to a design team really helps in getting to better ideas. And the last one is to love the problem more than the solutions. We don't fix problems. There's so many groups that we interact with where they're talking about all this stuff. And it's like, what problem are you trying to solve, gang? Like, oh, well, we don't talk about problems. That's negative. We use an asset-based approach, and it's all about strengths, and so we don't like talking about problems. What? Like, what are you doing? How do you know if you're making anything better if you don't know what problem you're working on? So fall in love with problems and live in those problem spaces and spend time with them, because if we better understand the problem, I don't know if this quote is a real Einstein quote or not, but it floats around as an Einstein quote, and it's right. basically, it goes a little something like if the world was going to end, we only had an hour to save the Earth. Einstein said, apparently, I'd spend 55 minutes on the problem and 5 minutes on solutions. When we better understand the problem and what's actually causing it, we get way better ideas for fixing it. The ideas piece isn't that hard. Love problems. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Bronk. That's awesome. I tried the love problems thing, and I was told that I was wrong. The person said, I think you misspoke. You can't mean love problems. Oh, wait, before you go, we're going to get some people to ask you some questions, okay? Anybody have any questions about turkey sperm? We can talk about that. What is it? What kind of packaging does it come in? How do you ship it? What's the temperature?
Boxes, cardboard boxes.
Cardboard boxes. Okay. Actually, that's all I have. Yes. Yes, Mike. What's that? Oh, would you prefer this?
I use the throwing mic.
Yeah, throw it right at the.
Thanks, Brock. Super wonderful. And I just want to say that as someone who works in design thinking a lot, your language is incredibly accessible and experimental. So a couple of quick reflections. So the simple, complicated, complex is Brenda Zimmerman.
Great.
Brenda is out of York University, an amazing person. And the value of the simple, complex is that using human-centered design and other approaches best works with complex challenges. If you have a simple problem like a recipe, just follow the damn recipe. If you've got even a complicated one, there are routes and manuals and things to do with deep level of expertise. But in the world that we're working in a world of complexity, that's when these kind of tools are incredibly helpful. So just adding a bit there. I would also say that in Saskatchewan, there is a guy called Dale McPhee who is just closed. He's a justice lead, and he's just closed a prison which was full of persons who were Indigenous because he's turned it into a job training program. So there is, I loved your last thing about, what is it, better is absolutely possible, which I think is what we really need in this work is a sense of the possible. And I think that someone like these kind of made in Canada success stories we have to share. And finally, I would say at Mars we talk about unicorns all the time. And it means something completely different, but I do think there's value in imagination and playing with that. So thank you for that. Okay, ready, throw?
Cool.
I really like the last point you made around loving the problem. And to be honest, when working with a lot of different clients, particularly in the big business kind of side of things, they don't often want to really talk about that because they feel like they have all the answers, and it's just about execution. And I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you do get to that place, if you have reluctance to talk about the problem and get straight into execution, how you get people to get into that patient kind of open space where we can do that.
Yeah, so that thing I said earlier about having people ask questions is a really lovely way, and it kind of aligns with how people think they're supposed to work anyway. So in traditional spaces, I would offer up, this is my idea and the big solution to the thing we're going to do, and then a whole bunch of people have been trained to just tear that to pieces to make sure that that idea is like, that they have somehow criticized that idea because that's what we're supposed to do. So it's really natural for us to find criticism in things, often in unhelpful ways. I could talk about that for half an hour, but anyway. So if we're talking about an initiative or a thing we want to do, having everyone just write out what are your top 3 questions about this thing, I think begins to start a conversation and open a space up around, so what problem are we actually talking about? Does that help? It's just it's an easy technique to do, and you can do it in 15 minutes.
First, I will say out loud, it's really hard to hear the mic if you don't hold it up like this. So sometimes people over there, I couldn't hear you, but I'm sure your comments were valuable. Thank you. But I wanted to say thank you for the questions idea. And what you shared about kids and their concerns is really sad, but really helpful. Instead of trying to, dig around and figure out what they're thinking and what they're instead of trying to ask the right questions, I guess, asking them to to just share what their questions are. I'm fascinated by that, and I don't know if you have even more work on that or something to read. I'd love to learn more about that approach.
Yeah, so I can connect with you after about that, but I think the other thing just that's interesting about it and the idea that it's useless when kids ask questions like, do ducks sing sometimes? Why do owls have feathers? So on. Why? Oh, this one was sad. Why did the baby caribou get eaten by the wolf? So we had to unpack what that was about, which was planet Earth, and very disturbed by this as an idea. And again, speaks to a kid who is not really experiencing any adversity in their life, because this is some of the first contact with that they've had. But something like unicorns running around everywhere, when I was talking to some of the academics that were trying to tell me why this was useless, when do kids stop saying things like that? When do we rip that out of them? Because we do it really young, and we focus them on these super narrow pinholes that they have to hit 20 years in the future, because now you have to have a master's degree if you're going to be successful. And that starts, it starts in the very beginning of school. We're taking the wonder away from kids. We're ripping the possible from them. And that's something for us to examine. So how many kids, ask those kinds of questions, or do they feel embarrassment about it now because we're training them to do that? So yeah, ask people to ask you questions is a way better way to engage them than trying to come up with questions on your own. Again, your questions will all be awful.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ron.